Hi, I'm Jeff Rains, the pastor of First Baptist Church Shreveport. I'm so glad you're listening today to the First Baptist Podcast. We worship every Sunday at 10:30 a.m. at 543 Ockley Drive in Shreveport. There is always a place for you.
One thing that I love about our congregation is the Sunday morning worship time, where we all can come together, different ages, different backgrounds, different contexts, yet we come together on a Sunday morning and worship one God. I think it's beautiful. And this morning, when we start, I want to do a little challenge for us. So this is going to be an interactive moment this morning. So wake up and get ready. We're going to do a challenge that's been going around where I'm going to say a action, and you are going to do the action based on how you grew up and what you've done. So there's so many generations in here. There's probably 4 generations. So all of us growing up have experienced things in different ways and experienced different activities in different ways. So I want you to see your friends around you and how they do those same things whenever I give you a action. Does that make sense? So the first one is taking a picture. Show me how you take a picture. All right, so some of us have done this. I saw a youth do this, like a selfie. We all have different ways of taking pictures. Someone did this where they went under and just kidding. All right, now pick up a phone and dial a number. Pick up your phone, dial your number. We got some people doing this. We got some doing this. That's what I would do, dial a number. All different. Now hang up the phone. Okay, we got some doing this. We got some doing that. Everyone's different. Roll down your car window. How do you do that? Yeah, some press, some roll. That's right. And the last one, make a heart. Show a sign of love. How would you do that? I grew up doing it like this. I think the kids these days do this, or I forget how they do it. Yeah, like that. That's the new one. There's this. Yeah, there's different ways to do that too. We all come from different backgrounds and ages, and that's what makes us so beautiful and unique, is that we can all come together, especially when it comes to love. Worldly love is different for everybody. Some have grown up with wonderful examples of love in their life, models with an unconditional love, while others have not. Some have had difficult relationships and friendships where love might have been distorted, and they have a different understanding what love can be. So when we become a Christian and we're told to love others, we all have a different idea of what that looks like based on what the world has told us about love. But God's love is so much greater and so much different than what worldly love has to offer. And this is what Paul is explaining today in this beautifully written chapter of 1 Corinthians 13, where we'll be this morning. A few weeks ago, Ryan walked us through 1 Corinthians chapter 12, and let me tell you, he really just threw up that ball so I could hit it out of the park. It's a perfect intro to chapter 13. Without chapters 12 and 14 of 1 Corinthians, it wouldn't really make any sense. We learn in chapter 12 that Paul is trying to convince the community that all of their gifts are equal and that each gift is unique, pointing all towards Christ. Paul specifically mentions speaking in tongues and prophecy because those are very common things that were happening in the Corinth church during that time. So if you turn to chapter 12 with me and you go to verse 31, we're going to start there before we start chapter 13. He says on verse 31, "Now eagerly desire the greatest gifts." So Paul's telling the Corinthians all of these gifts in tongues and prophecy, different types of tongues. Are you a teacher? Do you work miracle? Do you have the gift of healing? Now here is an even greater gift. And the Corinthians, the readers, are right at the edge of their seat. They're ready because they're competitive. They want to know what the even greater gift is so that they can do that gift and shine. And Paul says the greatest gift is love. Man, he said love? It's like he pulled the rug from right under them. The most excellent way to live is through love. There's no glamour in love. There's no praise in tongues or prophecy. There's glamour in tongues and prophecy. There's praise in that. There's powerful public prayers where you can be seen and show off all your knowledge and understanding of the scriptures. But in self-giving Christ-like love, there's no glamour in that. Paul's description here in chapter 13 must sting a little bit for the Corinthian church. We've read already in this chapter how they have been rude with one another. They've been fighting with one another and eating food before giving to the poor and not doing their communion the right way. And so Paul chastises them in a very clear and honest way. He sandwiches this beautiful poem in chapter 13 between two chapters on spiritual gifts. And Paul does this on purpose. His encomium to love praises God's agape love as the gift that validates all other spiritual gifts. But it also indicts the Corinthian church on their lack of love. And this could be the root of their problems, that they have lost their way in an understanding of what real love is. It's not a human virtue that comes and goes with our feelings and center around our own needs, but it's rooted in God's love in Christ. It's sacrificial, it's life-giving. This is that type of love. And this chapter is one of the most famous chapters in the Bible. We call it the love chapter, and we've probably heard it before. You've probably heard it at a wedding or within a Bible study. You maybe even have memorized it. And all for good reason. It is a beautiful chapter about love. However, our world has taken this chapter about love, and turned it into something different than what Paul intended. It's not a chapter about the love of marriage. It's a hard word in English, like we talked about earlier, because love can mean so many different things. We can love our neighbor, we can love pizza, we can love our spouse, we can love the church, we can love God, we can love all these things, and in English we have one word for that. That's not the case here in Paul's language. In the Greek, Paul only uses one word for love, and that is agape love. That's the sacrificial, unconditional, God-like love. He did not use the lovey-dovey, emotional word for love. He didn't use the friendship word for love, where it's more about loving one another. He intentionally used a Christ-like definition of love. So as we explore this love chapter today, may we open our minds to a new understanding of love. It's not an emotion or how we feel, but it's an action. It's defined by what Christ has done for us. His death on the cross is the true definition of agape love. And once we understand this type of love, we can be free in living a life of love and living out everything in our life through love. We can have a fuller understanding that God's love, displayed on the cross through Christ, can be magnified in our own lives. So first we're going to turn to chapter 13 and we're going to read verses 1 through 3. Let's read together. If I speak, you already know it, right? If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. So right at the beginning, Paul is placing these gifts that he just talked about in chapter 12 at the center stage of what love really is. Without love, all of those gifts are for nothing. And he even went a step further. He not only said the gifts are for nothing, but I am nothing. He makes it personal. Without this God love, what's the point? How can we live without this true God love? Even the highest of gifts do not amount to anything if there is no Jesus love with them. And we know what Paul means when he talks about this type of love because he talks about it all through the New Testament. In all of the letters that Paul wrote in the New Testament, he over and over again defined love in a specific way. So I'm going to point to 3 of those in other letters, and you can just listen along. The first is Galatians 2:20. All these verses are very popular. You might know some of these. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives within me. The life that I now live in the body, I live by faith in God, the Son of God, who loved me because he had strong feelings toward me. Is that how it goes? No, it's not. A life I live in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself up for me. Sacrificial love is giving yourself up. Ephesians 5, verses 1 through 2. Follow God's example, therefore, as dearly loved children, and walk in the way of love, because Jesus thinks we're really, really good looking, right? No. Just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. Jesus loves us because he gave himself up for us as a sacrificing, a pleasing aroma for God. And the last one is Romans 5:8. But God demonstrates his own love for us, that we were still sinners. What? Christ died for us. Not only is Jesus' love this sacrificial love, but now we also see God's love is displayed through Christ dying for us. It is a clear understanding of what Paul's definition is when he talks about this type of love. It's sacrificial. It's giving up oneself to honor God with our actions. This is what he's asking the Corinthians and us to do with their spiritual gifts. Love others. So for Christians, when we talk about love, we are saying that we are going to act in a way that brings about the well-being of another person. That's what we say when we talk about we are loving. In the book, How to Know a Person, David Brooks talks about 2 options for kind of interacting with people. You can either be a diminisher or an illuminator. I think this is really interesting. A diminisher takes in a conversation and they quickly cut you off. They limit your thoughts or your stories, and when you leave that conversation with them, you feel tired, you feel disheartened, and you just don't feel like yourself. Have you ever had a conversation with a diminisher in your life? Or maybe we've all been diminishers at some point. But illuminators are great listeners. They celebrate your achievements and they listen to you. They see you for who you really are with no judgment. And when you walk away from an illuminator, you feel seen, you feel loved, you feel encouraged, and you feel more like yourself and able to do more that God has called you to do. And I can think of a lot of illuminators in this church. We've all experienced those conversations where we've had an experience with a diminisher or an illuminator. And that's in some way what I think Paul is saying to the Corinthians here. The world tells us to love ourselves, to put ourselves first, to compete, to be the best, to not worry about any other people's time or worries or efforts. This is a self-seeking and diminishing type of love. But God's style of love is illuminating. It brings light to the world. You take time to listen. You celebrate others. You care less about yourself and more about others and what their accomplishments are, less about your own accomplishments and more about the joy and truth that others are bringing. This type of illuminating love does not mean that you have to think less of yourself. In fact, the opposite happens. When you illuminate others and they become more of themselves, you also become a greater version of yourself. You are free in this love to serve others. And that is the paradox of God's love. The more that I give out of myself, the more I become truly like myself. So as we move on in 1 Corinthians, we have a list now of famous actions that Paul is describing of what love is. And once Paul has established this necessity for love, he then lists these acts. And we've heard a lot of these, right? It's easy for us to glance over this or to repeat them and say them. But we're going to take the time to slowly read and really think about these words that Paul says here about love. Verse 4. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no records of wrong. Love does not delight in evil. It rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. So when we take a closer look at these words that Paul is describing to use love, they're not adjectives, they're verbs. He uses 15 verbs in 3 verses. So what does that mean? What is Paul saying about what love is? It's an action, right? It's not static, it's not an emotion, it's not conveyed by our words, but only through our actions do we display this Christ-like love. When we are patient, we are giving up our own time for someone else or something else. We are letting the space be focused outside of ourselves. We are no longer impatient with our own agenda, but focusing something outside of ourselves. When we love in kindness, we are being hospitable with our atmosphere that's around us. The kids will say, we've got a good vibe, right? We give off this good vibe. We are not unkind, but we pay attention and care for others. When we enter a room, it is noticeable that we are giving kindness to other people and not sucking the life out of the room. The Corinth church community struggles with giving others time and treating others well. And then we transition to these statements about what love is not. We can see kind of what a diminisher might look like in this situation. A diminisher is jealous. A diminisher brings the struggles back to themselves. They constantly put their needs above others. And this list is not exhaustive of all the traits that love can be in Christian love. It's aimed specifically towards what's going on in the Corinth church at the time. But when we think about the opposite of these descriptions, we see what we already know and about the Corinthians from previous texts. They are impatient with one another. They are unkind. They are filled with jealousy and puffed up in their confidence. Paul is praising love by using actions that are opposite of what the community in Corinth is doing at the time. And that should hit them where it hurts. It seems like a beautiful love poem, but really there's some strong words there where you can feel a tension about what Paul is saying when describing love. And we can feel this too. There's 16 ways that I've probably failed at loving just this week in this chapter, right? We're human. We fall short of this love and what it really looks like in our lives. I think about my sons right now. Henry, who's 7, had a wonderful year in first grade. First grade's so fun because at the beginning of the year, they don't know how to write, they don't know how to read, and then all of a sudden they start reading so much, and by the end of the year, they're reading everything, and they're writing, and it's legible, and so Henry will write in his journal, and I can understand what he's saying. It's such a fun time in his life. And my middle son, Jack, he's 4. He also thinks because Big Brother can write, he can also write, which because of Miss Flint, he can write okay. She did pretty well. But he does not have the skills to write like a first grader. So the other night we were journaling in our little journals, and Jack said, "Can you tell me how to write mommy and daddy?" And I spelled out the words for him, and he really focused hard and wrote the words. And then he shows me, and he's so proud. He said, "Look, it says mommy and daddy," and it's just like lines and scribbles, and it's not anything legible at all. But I loved it. I was so proud of it because he took his time and really worked hard to try and learn this new skill for him. And I wonder if God sees us like this, growing in our faith and understanding what it means to love. As we grow in our faith, we unlearn the world view of love, and we relearn this Christ-like love that's described here in 1 Corinthians 13. And we're going to fall short. We're humans. Every day we fall short in this of this love that God is describing. But his grace and his patience in us is sufficient as we continue forward in the path of following him. His love never fails. And we are learning the ways of agape love. Just like a child, we will one day put away our childish behavior and grow more into a mature Christian, Christ-centered, action-loving adult. But we can only do that through the grace of God. And I think that might be Paul's point. We cannot love this way on our own. This is not a human love. This is a God love. Only through the Spirit of Christ working in us are we able to illuminate others in our love for Christ. So finally, he ends this chapter, verses 8 through 12, with Paul bringing back the three prominent spiritual gifts in Corinth: the prophecy, knowledge, and tongues. Let's read together. Love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me, for now we only see a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part that I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. So it's such a strong reminder that our gifts, this world, it's temporary. And only a small portion of what it will look like in eternity. Without love, our gifts mean nothing. And why does love never fail? Because it's eternal, because it's through Christ that we give our love. It's the very nature of Christ who defied death. Because of Jesus' act on the cross, we see a sacrificial love, and we're able to live that out here on earth. Jesus gives us a new commandment that we read earlier in John, to love one another. This is now a commandment from Jesus. And he was the ultimate example for us. In the passage we read earlier, he washed the disciples' feet. He lowered himself and humbled himself to wash his disciples' feet. It was a loving, selfless act that we can now follow in Christ. So when we think about God's love displayed through the cross of Christ, this chapter in 1 Corinthians 13 shows us how we can use that love to magnify God in all that we do. And this may be one of the most important things to understand about this chapter. Paul isn't merely inserting this beautiful poem about love between two spiritual gifts. He's correcting the Corinthians' entire value system. They want to know which gift is greatest. And Paul says they've been measuring greatness by the wrong standard. Love isn't the greatest gift of these lives. It's the more excellent way. It is the way that we live our lives every day. Without it, even the most spectacular acts that we do are nothing. With love, I can have faith that moves mountains. With love, I can hope that shines in the darkness. With love, I can illuminate others so that they can see their true self in Christ. So this morning, I wanted us just to really think about love differently. I wanted us to see this chapter and now be a reminder of how vast and how beautiful this love of Christ really is that can move through us. And we've already been doing this in our church. Our church has a beautiful way of showing love to one another, to others, through our actions. So today I've intentionally not read the whole passage together, although usually it is read together beautifully, because I wanted for us to really break down our understanding of what love means and unlearn the worldly understanding of love to relearn the agape Christ love.
Thank you for listening today to the First Baptist Shreveport podcast. You can learn more about our church and watch the services at firstbaptistshreveport.org.